Hi, how's it going? This is Resident of Colin for YouTube. I'm here to give my reaction review to episode 77 of Dark Shadows. So here we have Collinwood. They're zooming in on a great house. Uh, we see the inside of the house. Here's the top of the stairway. Here's Carolyn. She's coming out from where her room was, and she's coming down the steps into the drawing room to talk to her mom. Talk to Elizabeth. I've been thinking about Burke. Um, so what Carolyn does here is she talks about the man Blair, Mr. Blair, who says he was an old swindler who was in cahoots out to you defraud Elizabeth of her money. Um, so you could tell in this episode that though Carolyn is very much attractive to Burke, and even Elizabeth says, if Burke wasn't, whatever, if I were your age, I'd find him attractive. Uh, that Carolyn still finds Burke attractive, though even though Elizabeth says his plans aren't. Um, Carolyn says, I found David in Burke's hotel room. What was the question? What was he doing there? And Elizabeth, well, what were you doing there? Come on now. Um, Good opening, and that is the opening of this DS episode. The question you have to ask yourself is Carolyn telling the truth here? She said she went to Burke's hotel room to tell him, I didn't expect to see him again. Now she says, I guess I was mad. I knew he drove Vicky home. Guess I got jealous. David does say why he was there. He tells Carolyn, I was here to see Burke, and I came to see my friend. Carolyn says Burke is a mystery. Mysteries are intriguing. Um, this is an interesting. Elizabeth says many, many years ago, a stranger came to Collinwood. He was mysterious. He was strange because you knew nothing about his past. That's where the mystery lies. He was a very glib, this man. He had a very way with him. On what happened. I married him. It's Paul Stoddard. And you sort of see the look on Elizabeth's face like, what a regret, right? And Elizabeth says, yes, I loved him. Because he never told me much about him. What was their life like? Our life together was nothing. I always take that Liz means their marriage more so than. Elizabeth wants to see David. She's going to straighten him out about Burke too. As Elizabeth walks toward the windows. And there is David. Speak of the devil. The other devil's in Matthew Morgan is in David's room fixing something. David asks Matthew if he has any serious problems. Matthew's like, I've had many of them. This conversation all leads to David, having a divided loyalty between his Aunt Elizabeth and his family, basically, and Burke. To him, Burke's his friend. And if you're familiar with DS, there's no telling David otherwise in these beginning episodes. There's another reason I love this episode is really criminally underrated from a writing standpoint. And it's because of, another reason is because of Thayer David, who's Matthew Morgan. There's going to be a conversation between him and Carolyn in this episode where Carolyn is talking about Bill Malloy. It's early in the morning, what can I say? And yeah, well, actually, we're going. Dave, the pitcher did not. This pitcher of Burke that David has, David didn't receive it from Burke. He took it without Burke's knowledge. Anyway, Carolyn is talking about Bill Malloy. In this episode, Carolyn will talk about Bill Malloy and how Burke feels about the Bill Malloy case. It's because Bill Malloy was murdered, and the look on Matthew's face is like, I've talked about who the sheriff questions, and Matthew gets questioned once from what we see, but who really keeps Matthew sort of in your suspect list of the people who killed Bill Malloy is Matthew himself. His facial expressions. It's like, you seem real concerned about Bill Malloy. Why would you be? The cops have said, the sheriff said it's over. Matthew says Burke's a dangerous man to Carolyn. He's like a wounded tiger. He's a tiger. Yeah, this happens the same day. This episode happens the same day that Burke comes to Collinwood and says he's gonna buy it. You also have a very interesting dynamic again in this episode with especially Carolyn, David, and Matthew. There's no Vicky winners. There's no Victoria winners in this episode. Alexander's not in this episode. So what do? They take three characters, and we have a range of emotions. Elizabeth, now with Elizabeth's emotions, hers are the same here of trying to convince her nephew and her daughter that, hey, it's best to just stay away from Burke. It's best to keep your distance. Now, Though Sarah David's Matthew Morgan feels that same way, unbeknownst to Elizabeth, even though Elizabeth knows Matthew pushed Bill's body back in the water, Elizabeth does not know Matthew Morgan is responsible for Bill Malloy's death. So you see a bit of that emotional range on Thayer David's face, which is really, really, really criminally underrated in this episode. And you have this moment of Carolyn talking to him and not really noticing it. She's not a cop. Here's David coming to talk to his aunt. She says, I'm going to talk to you about Bark. And Burke, she tells him that Burke has declared open war on the Collins family, and he says, not me, or you're Collins. Elizabeth tells David that the present you were given was in the nature of a bribe. David says, no, it wasn't. And Elizabeth says, why do you think so much of him? And David says, I like him. He's my friend. And Elizabeth says he threatened to take away the cannery, the fishing fleet, and all of Collinwood. And he did. He made an offer. He made an offer, and then when they rejected that offer, he's like, okay, I'll put you out of business. Even David goes, he wouldn't. And Elizabeth says, hey, you must believe what I say. You're either for or against me. Because that's the battle lines are basically, they're drawn. Like, look here, this is what it is. You're either on this side or you're on that side. This is where this is where Carolyn has that conversation about Bill Malloy. You see Thayer David's face, him as Matthew Morgan make this face like he's concerned that Bill Malloy's murder case might be reopened. He says it's the law. He's talking about the verdict handed down by the court. And look at Matthew's face, or look at Thayer's face. It's anger, it's concern. It says a lot. Matthew would. Matthew would go after the wounded tiger. Um, So Elizabeth wants a promise from David that he'll never see Burke Devlin again. No, I won't. He won't promise it. Silly for that. It isn't your friend. Is that why you riding? Oh, she hasn't actually hired Mrs. Johnson yet. Mrs. Johnson hasn't even moved into the house yet. Again, because she's not been hired. Mrs. Johnson is here more to be the cook, clean the house, all the think of all those spoiled dinners that will come one day. They're gonna. My God! Oh my God! Elizabeth just wants David to do as she asked, not see Burke no more. And David says, same thing you have to say about hire Miss Johnson to be my jailer. She's not here to be your jailer, David. She's not going to be your jailer. Once she gets hired, she's going to be the cook. And there's David coming in his room, seeing Carolyn. David did steal it. Carolyn's right. He admitted to stealing it to Matthew. He borrowed from her. So, uh, we have a cruel fight between two family members over Burke Devlin with Carolyn and David, and it is gold. It's pure gold here. Uh, and Matthew, by the way, Matthew's still in David's room. He was fixing a drawer, and it's fixed, but he's still in there, like he's listening to this. David says that Burke would probably tell him to keep the picture even if he tried to give it back to him. He might actually. It's not far off. He also might want it back. Who knows with Burke? That's why Elizabeth said about Burke being mysterious. You never know what Burke Devlin's going to do. And between the writers and Mitch Ryan, they do a really good job of keeping Burke mysterious on a lot of things. It's like you expect him to say something one way, and then he says it the other, and it's like, wait, what? A prime example is the bleeder valve. The drawer is all fixed. No, Matthew says maybe it ain't his place to say it. You ought to be ashamed. Arguing over men who wants to destroy Collingwood. And they're still arguing. They're going right back at it. And, and then, yeah, Matthew's finally leaving David. Oh my God. Carolyn and David, gold. Like I said, just gold. So there are a lot of good things you get in this episode. this episode's almost over. I'll talk about it once this episode is over. David and here's Matthew Towell and Elizabeth, David and Carolyn. He says they're arguing over Burke, and they are. And Elizabeth admits I suppose he has deliberately been trying to win David over. And Burke says he shouldn't take, or Matthew says David shouldn't take presents from Burke. Elizabeth is contemplating some things as she's rubbing her hands together. And here comes Carolyn and David. Tell Carolyn to stop going through my things. She's messing everything up. For what? And Carolyn was going through his room. I should have. Carolyn apologized to David. David did not apologize to Carolyn. He did not. When he says birthday on birthday, standing on the staircase as you hear the music play, and that's the end of the episode. So, a lot of good stuff in this episode. And the writers do a really good job of keeping intrigue going. This whole episode is about Burke, but you have the other things that, too, like Bill Malloy's murder come up. Bill Malloy's death, because they're not calling it a murder because the coroner ruled it accidental death. And the person who's most concerned about that is the person who killed Bill Malloy. And you see Matthew Morgan's face in this episode of you see the concern on his face and anger at the same time, because you have Burke Devlin who's never going to stop probing, and Matthew is angry and he's concerned at the same time. And because a lot of the conversations about Burke in this episode, you have arguments between family members such as Elizabeth, David, and most importantly, Carolyn David. Elizabeth more squashes a lot of the things that go on. Like, she puts her foot down finally. No more talking about Burke in this house. I don't want to hear about it. No. David, who is, he has David chosen a side. Yeah, he's chosen his side, and what I mean by his side, I mean David's side. David has chosen his own side. He mentions Burke's name in the house, even though Elizabeth told him not to, as he's standing on the staircase. You might say, why don't I just say he's chosen Burke's side? Because for just as unpredictable as Burke is, David is too. David is very unpredictable. It's what makes a lot of the characters intriguing when you get into what they'll do. David will just leave the house and go running into town to Burke's at a whim. he will. I mean, he won't care about the consequence. Um, that's how bold the character is. So, alright guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. I'm gonna do episode 78 here.